Okay, if you could please come in and take your seat. About to start the final hearing. Please come in the coffee. Settle, take your seats. Seats over here. There's a nice breeze coming in through the door. Before I hand over to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I'd like to thank all of our partners. We'll thank you again tomorrow, but you have really made this a success. You're noted in the last 2 pages of the program. I won't go through all of them, but we very much appreciate this is not something that is simply done by CIPRI, simply done by the MFA, but it's a partnership in collaboration with all of these actors and our common agenda, bringing it together for peace building. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank a very special person. You all know her because you have all received emails from her at some point or another, somehow. Her name is Kate Sullivan. Kate? Kate?
Kate.
Kate?
Kate, there she is.
That is Kate. Kate Sullivan has been our coordinator. She has delivered 4 Stockholm Fora on peace and development in a row, all increasingly better than the one before, all these magnificent productions, bringing all of you together. She is moving on to become the Director of Partnerships at the Global Challenges Foundation. I mostly got it right. You can talk to her additionally after this. But we wish her all the success, and we thank you very much for everything you've done to make this a success. Urban, over to you.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you to you as well for the very close collaboration between the CIPRI and the Minister of Foreign Affairs to arrange this. And I just wanted to take a couple of words to thank you for coming. It's really lovely to meet colleagues, to meet experts, to meet friends. We have lovely weather. We have a wealth of experience. And we've heard about peace building and prevention, and we've heard about the importance to move from word to practice, and we've heard it's a system, or can also be an ecosystem which is bound together with many, many pieces to build sustainable peace. Before the next panel starts, we wanted to show a movie because we need to use all our tools. And this movie we made for our membership in the Security Council, which is one very important tool, of course. And it's called No New Names. And by that, I will introduce introduce the topic of the last session, you could say. So please, this is No New Names.
Let's call things by their proper name. War is failure. History is full of atrocities and death. We know the names. We must act to ensure that no new names are added to the list. We must act before wars are waged and massacres committed. Addressing the risk of violent conflict must lie at the heart of the UN's work. Conflicts can be prevented. The difference is broken dreams amid the rubble, or a life in peace. Every new name is a failure.
So, ministers, excellencies, dear friends, now they've taken away even the transparent roster, so here we are. But it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's last panel. And I believe that it captures many of the aspects that have been discussed during today's seminars and sessions. As we have stated already, the need is to not only respond but to prevent violent conflicts. And I think that it is fair to say that the time has passed when there were only two parties to a conflict, two parties struggling over territory with disciplined armies and what have you. And finally, in the end, they are able to shake hands thanks to one single mediator. You know that today's conflicts have changed nature. They are much more complex and long, and with numerous stakeholders fighting over religion or natural resources or identity or something else, and not seldom with both local, regional and global dimensions simultaneously. So we, of course, also then need to find new approaches to conflict resolution and mediation. And we know that there is no quick fix to prevent violent conflict, no easy manual that we can follow and tick off the boxes. It's really the everyday actions of men and women at all levels of society, from grassroots to diplomacy, from local peace clubs to formal negotiations that will make it. And we need to leverage also the small actions that works and better link efforts at different levels to create inclusive processes. Prevention means not only choosing to heed the warnings when they come, but investing in peaceful and resilient societies to avoid the causes to conflict emerging in the first place. And women's important role and contribution to prevention and conflict resolution and to keep peace have been long overseen. Patriarchal, traditional and conservative structures and norms continue to stop women from participating and influencing politics and peace processes. And I keep saying this is not a women's issue. It is a peace and security issue that women are involved. And it's not only a matter of rights, not only a goal in itself, but a prerequisite to achieve sustainable peace. And it therefore concerns everyone, both men and women. Civil society, I think, remains a beacon of hope in all of this, also the worrying signs that we see today. And we must build alliances, and we must increase our support also to these brave civil society actors, including women's organizations and human rights defenders, which play an essential role in building, in working both for prevention and keeping peace. So it's my hope that this discussion, this final discussion, will provide us with some concrete ideas on how to better link high-level diplomacy with local peace-building processes, and also how to overcome the barriers to women's participation. It's a slow progress, a slow peace, but there are many lessons to learn from the substantial progress that we've seen and contributed to. And I think our panelists have plenty of experience in this regard. I will now invite and welcome our moderator for this final panel, the eminent Melanie Greenberg. Welcome.
Good.
So, thank you.
And would you like to stay up here?
You want me to sit somewhere, or yeah?
Sure. Or we could have our chair of honor here.
Okay.
Thank you, Minister. And it is a great pleasure to be here to welcome you again to our final panel on the day, which is called Dialogue in a Multipolar World, politics, diplomacy, and the role of women, all in 60 minutes. And to thank CIPRI and to thank the ministry again for a series of inspiring conversations today, which will now continue on a theme which I feel really summarizes what we heard in our first panel this morning, because it looks at inclusion along two axes. The first is a necessity not for track 1, track 2, or even 6, 7, and 8, but a multipolar ecosystem in which civil society works along with government for inclusive peace. And the second is on the role of women, both in the government and in society, and the necessity for women for an inclusive and sustainable peace. So it's a great pleasure to welcome our panel here. When you come up, please take a seat. We have His Honorable Gbehzohngar Milton Findley, the Minister for Foreign Affairs from Liberia. Welcome back. Deputy Foreign Minister of Afghanistan, Adela. Welcome. Mr. Scott Weber, Director of Interpeace. Welcome. And Ms. Asha Sayad, the Executive Director of the Somali Women's Leadership Initiative.
Hello.
Yes. So, please make yourself comfortable.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll sit here and I'll stand at the end and perch. So, Minister Findley, if we can please start with you. So women have had a strong influence in Liberia's peace process. And of course, your former president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, was both a powerful symbol and actor in peace building and state building. Within the new government, I wonder if you could please tell us about your priorities for inclusion in the new government and the ongoing peace process.
Well, thank you. Okay, it's working fine. The new government objective is to achieve 30% minimum female in the administration of the government, both in the political sector, the legislature, well, in all three branches of government, put it that way. We haven't been able to do very well in the legislature. It's been disappointing. We haven't been able to get the 30% women to get elected. Now, that is a democratic process that every 3 years we have to go through elections for the Senate and the House of Representatives. I think we've done very well. President Sirleaf has done very well appointing judges on the judiciary branch of government. So there seems to be a little bit good balance. We have 2 female on the Supreme Court with 3 male. So the Supreme Court looks good. The executive branch of government right now, we have not met the target of the 1/3 on the top level of the cabinet. But on the deputy ministers and assistant ministers, we've exceeded the 1/3 appointment by the president. But here's the problem, and it's a tricky one. We have 51%, 52% female voters. And yet and still, for some reason, we have not been able to get the women to vote for women candidates. What is the problem? I used to be a senator, and my thing is, why do we need 1/3? Why wouldn't we go for 50%? The issue there is we have a problem. And to be able to address that problem, and I will try to be as blunt as I can be on this issue, is that our Constitution needs to be changed. We have to guarantee seats for women in the parliament. In the absence of that, political parties will not bring female candidates up. They are at a disadvantage when it comes to the political arena. And so the way to address the 1/3 or whatever you want, or the 50%, is to do that through a constitutional means. The statute just wouldn't satisfy because we have gone and said, well, look, political parties supposed to produce 1/3 of their candidates should be female. But even at that, you don't have the 1/3. You got the 1/3 in the political parties, but at the end results, what we really want is 1/3 female in the legislature. And that doesn't suffice. It just doesn't satisfy that. So we have to go through a referendum and change the constitution to guaranteed 1/3 seats for women in the legislature. Anything less than that, anything other than that, we just will not achieve that objective. So politically, Liberia is still lacking. Now, where can we get help to help the gender issue and bring that gender balance? How can we do that? Women in Liberia are at a disadvantage, both politically and financially. So we have to strengthen them financially. And this is where I think the international community needs to come in and start to work with women groups to strengthen the capacity of women to participate in this political process. Most of the women are shy away because they don't have the financial means. It's a cultural society that men are dominant in. And so as a result of that, we marginalize most of the women that have political potential to get into the legislature and get into politics. I like to say this. I love to work with women because they can achieve, they work towards achieving the objective and the goals. Yes, we had a female president, and now we have a female vice president, but it's still not enough. We haven't done much. If you look at the structure and where the decisions are made, the voice of women are not strong enough in Liberia.
Well, thank you, Minister. And when you help pass the referendum in Liberia, I hope you'll come to the United States and help us do the same.
Thank you. Thank you.
Deputy Minister Raz, pleasure to have you with us as a woman serving in government. And your president, Ashraf Ghani, has talked about the importance of women in government and their role in future negotiations with the Taliban. But I wonder if you could speak to your experience in government as a woman in a patriarchal, conservative society, and how can and should women support each other and men support women in the political structure in Afghanistan?
Hello to everyone again, back in here. And apologies if I do come across repetitive because you're hearing me for the third time. It is my favorite topic, and you just open a Pandora box. In a patriarchal society, despite its being Afghanistan or any other country, and I think I'm very, very happy to be in the room in the presence of very strong women leaders and Madam Minister as well. I think this country have come a long way forward, and there are a lot of countries that do make a model. Sweden is one of the countries to follow the lead. But in a patriarchal society, it's complicated in a sense when women work at the leadership position. And I'm going to share my own personal experience, and a lot of my female colleagues know that. I started to work in 2013 with the Afghan government, and that was with the previous administration. I worked as a deputy spokesperson at the presidential palace. And I came after 8.5 years back to Afghanistan after when I finished my studies in the US. When I came back, I enjoyed my work, and then within a year, the new administration came, and I was promoted to a higher position. And it was interesting enough for me that within the same workspace, same colleagues, almost the same colleagues, I started to hear that I turned to be a very arrogant woman. I turned to be very disrespectful, and I turned to be really bossy. And for a good 6 months, at the beginning, I didn't really listen, and later on it started to affect me. And within 6 months, I believed it. I believed that was really me. And I really wanted to reflect and find out how to solve and address these issues. And there was another common factor I found among my female colleagues who were working with me, and none of them found me being bossy, being arrogant, and being disrespectful. So I tried to figure out where this analysis came, and I realized that there was a level of acceptance within the society for a woman being in a supporting role, and as soon as you become at the leadership role, there is right away the way they tag you or the way they frame you as that all those, once I mentioned being arrogant, being disrespectful. And I tried to question, what is it, why? And I realized it's not that somebody is, basically those colleagues of mine were not good people. It is just the society and a mindset. The mindset that we have always believed in women to be the silent voice within the society and within our own families. And as soon as they became to raise, and not even raising their voice, but actually doing exactly what their job is, being the boss and managing the work, they start to really being confused where to put you in. And that's where those tags comes along, being disrespectful and being arrogant. And learning from that experience, when I started to get my new position, the challenges even were more severe. And some of my colleagues know it took me a good 1 year to take the portfolio that I was supposed to work, because the assumption was, and it's with a lot of societies as well, that when you take as a woman the leadership position in post-conflict countries where women do not have representation, or developing countries, in conservative societies, so the first way of empowering women is a quota system, making sure that the seats are reserved. So when I got my job, the assumption within my workspace was that I got my job because I am a woman. But I knew I got my job because I deserved it, and I owned it. And after 1 year, I got my portfolio. So putting all that together, what I learned and where we are right now in Afghanistan overall, there is a great story that I want to share with everyone in here, is that within the government institution, at the political leadership, through His Excellency the President, there is such a strong belief he has on women based on their abilities, not because only they're a woman and they need to get that position because there's a quota system. He believes on their ability, and I've heard him many times. He believes that women are less corrupt, I agree, and women are very detail-oriented, I absolutely agree, and then that women are more committed to their jobs. So based on those qualities, he is pushing to bring women up to the leadership level. And the challenge we have is, once we get the job, just making sure that it's because we deserved it, not because we were given. And it will take a little longer time. It will take a time for my male colleagues to accept that when they have a female colleague in the room, she is there, and she has an opinion, and her opinion needs to be respected. So going forward, and bigger agendas we have. First, peace building. I think a major issue right now that we are faced and we are challenged, and I'm just going to openly say that now we're going to go forward, and when we're discussing with the Taliban, the major concern that women in the government and outside of the government have is what happens with the peace negotiation. Will they maintain their women will have their rights still, or it will be negotiated? I think it will be never negotiated, but it's important for women to make sure that their voice is heard. I think I got a sign that I should stop. No, no.
We'll certainly come back to that theme.
Sure.
And to say that very recently there was a poll in the United States of elementary school children, and they were asked to draw a leader. 98% drew a picture of a man in a suit. So it starts at a very early age.
It really does start from an age, and I think it's really even more difficult to work and believe that you are not only there because you're a woman. Because after a while, as I said, you start to believe exactly that's why you're there. But after a while, you have to just really pinch yourself back. So I think for us, what really have started to work well with the younger generation coming in, I think the network. And also for me, learning and hearing that we're not the only, Afghanistan is not the only society where women have struggled. Women in the leadership across the world, I think, have trouble, and it does take us more persistence to just make sure we are there because we're doing our job.
Good, thank you. And now turning to the civil society side of the aisle. Mr. Weber, you lead Interpeace, which has been negotiating and mediating and building peace successfully around the world for more than 20 years. What are some of the lessons you've learned about what makes, how inclusion is possible, both in the sense of multi-track diplomacy and also in terms of women's inclusion?
Thank you, Melanie and Madam Minister, and thank you to the Ministry and to CIPRI for the invitation to be with you today. I think if we take the specific angle that we're touching on with women's inclusion, I think we can, one of my frustrations with the 1325 agenda is that we have focused it so much on trying to get more women to the table, which is important. Let's be clear, it is important. But we know from the research that it's not about how many women are at the table, it's about the quality of their participation, their ability to actually shape events and shape the discussion or not. That makes the difference of their participation or not, just like any other participant. And my frustration is that we focus more on numbers and not realized enough that the table itself is the wrong framework. That we're putting too much emphasis on the table, on the negotiating process, for example, and not enough on all the other processes that are necessary for peace to actually stick. Often in peace negotiations, you have essentially the guys with the guns, the thugs, around the table, talking about the future of the country. Now, we shouldn't be giving them the power to determine the future of the society after they've just destroyed it, and yet we do. So, much like in how we think about gender in the workplace, where we're looking at how do we get more women in leadership positions in the workplace, et cetera, or in boards, et cetera, what we need to do is actually change the workplace itself to make it more inclusive. Same thing for peace processes. So one of the things we're really advocating with experience of 24 years of doing this work is that we need to actually rethink peace processes quite fundamentally at various levels. We talked about the tracks at various times because peace processes are long-term efforts, not short-term efforts. Politics is short-term. So it's all a question of how you align short-term efforts with the longer-term needs. So that's, I think, one of the key lessons that we've learned. The other thing that we've learned is that why should peace processes be inclusive? It's because they have to be legitimate and representative of society. And if they're not inclusive, they're not going to be legitimate in the long run. It's as simple as that. So one of the things that we've done, in fact, it's our Somali brothers and sisters that taught us this, is when we stopped doing conflict analysis only in societies like Somalia, but we started to do peace mapping, to look at not where is it burning and why, but looked at where is it not burning and why. It was much more instructive. It was much more illuminating. How did Somalis figure out how to solve problems without anybody's help, without the international community's help, etc.? From a peace mapping perspective, what we learned from the Somalis was that women play an absolutely central role at why certain parts of Somalia were stable. So even from an evidence base about what does work, the minister was talking about let's focus on what does work and why. That's exactly a peace mapping approach. If you just take that approach, guess what? Much of the solutions Somalis are already finding is because women are playing the key role. So let's reflect reality into a peace process rather than try to shape peace processes based on schema. Let's reflect the reality of what's actually working in society. That's how we would approach it.
Good, thank you so much. Which leads us very beautifully to you, Ms. Sayad. Thank you for joining us. And you heard Mr. Weber talk about the role of women in Somalia at peace at all different levels. What have you found? Is there a different kind of decision-making, a different feel to political processes with a stronger engagement of women in your country?
Thank you, Melanie. Let me take this opportunity and thank our Minister of Sweden and the government of Sweden for putting together this important forum, and at the same time inviting some, a lot of high delegation, and including me and the delegate from Somalia. If I go back to your question, yes, as the director said, the Somali woman for the last 25, 27 years that we had conflict in Somalia, they were the breadwinners. They were the ones who were holding together the family. The men, either they were fighting or they were dead. So they were keeping together the family, working for the family, and running with the children in drought, in flooding, in all kind of disaster. So now that we have a government that's not even interim, but a sovereign government, we had 2 elections since we passed the interim government. The previous government and this government. The previous government, we didn't have a lot of women in the parliament, 14%. And we didn't have a lot of women in government institutions. So this government, the women decided to have minimum 30% in the parliament and in the government institutions. So this campaign to get the minimum 30% quota united the Somali women, whether politicians or civil society or just ordinary women or women in the diaspora. So we united, we campaigned, and we didn't reach the maximum or even the 30%, but we reached 24%, which is significant. And because of that, now this government that we have that has been elected in 2016, we have 24% in the parliament. And we also have 6 ministers in the federal government cabinet. That is really an impact, or that the fight or the campaign brought that. The other thing that I want to mention is there's a big awareness now that whenever they are nominating a committee or hiring, they are aware of that 30%. And recently, when they were putting together a committee that will administer the hiring of the speaker, actually we had 30% in that committee. And for them to realize and to remember that women should be there, minimum 30%, that was something. The other thing is Somali politics is based on clan base, 4.5. I don't know where they counted and they reached that decision, 4.5. So 4 big clans and 1, small clan. So the women now are rallying behind their clans. And once they are with the clan, they tend to support the clan, and they will support men in their clan. So that's not a good thing for the woman. We need that woman rally behind women, support women, and fight for women position and women rights. So in the coming 2020 election, we are hoping that we reach that minimum 50, because in our country, the population, 75% are women. 75% are women. But at the same time, women are not supporting women because of this clan-based, structure. That's not helping the woman. And when we are hoping that when we get, political parties, that we choose the parties that are led either by women or the top 3 leaders, one at least is a woman. So hopefully we'll get there.
Good, thank you. It's been so fascinating hearing all of you, because you've approached this question, especially of women's inclusion, both from a structural perspective, how do we build a 20-year-long inclusive table? From a normative perspective, how does that 10% get to feel like that is the norm? And from an emotional perspective, of what does it feel to hold the reins of women's leadership? But what do you think it would take in all of your contexts, whether civil society or government, for women to support each other? What does actual support look like? Would you like to start, Becky?
Yeah. This is a very important question, and I think as a woman I take the liberty to answer it very ruthlessly. There had been a lot of examples when I started to work in a lot of it through my male colleagues. They would come and tell me that, well, we know this woman so-and-so working in this position, and the women don't like each other. I think that was the first. And then they do not support each other. And for me, it took me to think about it. Is it true or not? So when I came to Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it was interesting that among not supporting, there were like a minority, about 2 women that probably were not too happy. But the majority did support. And what I found the commonalities where women support each other and the blame that they do not support. I think the part that they do not support, it's just because as a minority within the society, as a way to survive, we're pushed to act like the majority. In the majority are men, and their behavior towards women, believe it or not, accept it, you don't support women. So that's where, I think that's where there is a pressure. But for us in Afghanistan, our experience shows that there is more of a support among the younger generation. And among the younger generation is because we learn from the generation before us. And for us, we realize in order, as a minority, for us to succeed where we are, we have to be united and be cohesive and because that's where we are going to be heard. If we're not going to be heard, and we're going to be pushed back. And learning from that, there is a very active engagement among the younger generation women who are in the public sector and those who are in the civil society to make sure that we support each one of us. And it's not only in places like Afghanistan, and let me bring that up. I think I read an article about 2 years ago. It was about women in the White House. And the article said that women in the White House also had an issue when they will come to the staff meeting. A lot of the time their ideas will be shared and it will be ignored. So they came up with a mechanism, some of them, they said, okay, next time when we go, if I share an idea, the next woman will, just for the sake of it, repeat the same idea in the third woman. And then they did the exact same practice, and they realized it was heard by the president, and he couldn't ignore it, and he will say, yes, that's a very good idea. So we said, exactly, we're going to do the same thing. So now we're absolutely practicing the same method. We meet formally and informally with each other. We have tried to, being the smaller number should not be used as a weakness among us, but rather as a strength. We're there, and we always have brought up very critical issues. And I think we have been also very privileged to work and be at the time with an administration where His Excellency the President has a great openness towards women in hearing them. So there have been a lot of the meetings that when we sit and he really openly points out to his male cabinet members, and he says that you are the men, you're the men in suit. You're still men in suit, but not respecting women within your office. And I think that open discussion among the civil servants and acknowledging that there is an issue had been very helpful and extremely positive. And the network that we started to build up, learning from the older generation, from their wise advice, from their courageous steps being made, but building upon the success in learning from the mistakes as well.
Good, thank you. And Minister Findley, yes.
Well, let me divide a little bit from Scott. The issue is not about numbers, true, but when you come from a society where women have been basically disenfranchised from going to school, basically the state have not paid or carried out its responsibility, its social responsibility, to make sure that the girls go to school. Then it becomes an issue because when she turns 18 and 19, she becomes part of the society. If you went into the villages where they live, these females are much more productive than the male. So, from my perspective, is I'm not looking at the educational background. I'm looking at what contribution they've made to the society that brings them into the political circle. Liberia would not be where it is today without women taking the initiative to bring peace to Liberia. Period. We just wouldn't be there. It was the women that took on the battle and said, well, look, we are going to force peace in Liberia, and therefore peace came. And that's one of the reasons why I say I like to work with women, because, I mean, you're going to get results with organization skills. I mean, everything around working and getting and achieving your objective. The other issue is, how do we really address the issue of bringing women into the mainstream political cycle? And I must say thanks to Sweden, because Sweden have been there supporting the gender issue and building women organization in Liberia, which most of the other partners will invest into that process. But we need to get them to understand that they are important in the society. We need to get the female to reach out to the women in the villages, in the small towns, that they are important to this process of building peace, of building economic growth, of talking about development. They have to be a part of it. How do we do that? It's simple. One is to build the capacity of those women that are already educated, that already contributing to the communities, and not necessarily educated, because I know some women who have never gone to school and are very knowledgeable and brilliant in terms of making decisions. The other aspect which I mentioned earlier is essential, that the Constitution, the law, must give women the right to participate. Men, we are not going to give you women any space or chance to come and compete with us. Period. We're not going to do that. So you have to force us to do that. We have to have the law. And it's not the statute. The Constitution must say 50% of these positions will be set aside for women. And it's not only women that are going to vote for them, the population is going to vote for them, which means men as well as women are going to vote for the representation of those positions. So we have to take it from the right perspective. It's about time now that we raise that discussion. And it's not only unique to Liberia. I'm sure that there are other African countries that are faced with similar situation. And most of the women in this room who work in these different countries, I'm sure you have the same, I'm hearing the same situation here. So government now has to take on the responsibility to ensure that women are not only serving at the will and pleasure of the president, but are in the position of where policies, decisions are made, and policies are made to affect the lives of people. So we would like to see more support from our international partners.
Thank you.
If I add to the Minister's points, for example, in Somalia, the last 25 years, the women who are in Somalia were sustaining the livelihood of the families. If the families have boys and girls and they don't have the economic capacity to send all of them to school, they will send the boys to school. So the girls, will stay home. But at the same time, what the minister said, they are more capable than the women who went to school, and they are more, active and contributing. But now, in Somalia, when we are seeking for inclusivity and equal opportunity, the women are lacking behind because of lack of education. That's one factor. The other factor is this 4.5 selection election that the government now is based on. For example, if a clan has three parliament seats, one should be a woman. So that clan will just grab a woman from his home, his sister, his mother, his wife, and put there without looking into the qualification or what she's capable of. So that itself will hinder the women supporting each other, because the woman in that position will say that she came because of 4.5. She didn't come, with the support of women. So that's why they are not supporting each other. That's one factor also. The other factor is when women are elected and they are in the parliament, and it happens, we have 81 women in our parliament now, and they are not supporting each other. The reason being that they are affiliated with different clans, and they will support them, their clan or her clan. So that's another thing that will set back the women efforts to support each other. Those are few, items that hinder women to prosper or to be in a position where she can sit decision-making tables. The clan-based structure is literally, destroying women's aspiration, or if they want to be part of the politics.
We raise such important issues around tokenism, around how to work with societal structures to encourage rather than discourage women.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Mr. Weber, as a member of civil society, how do you see civil... We're with the ministers here, I want to be formal. How do you see civil society supporting women in these very complicated and complex peace processes?
Well, look, in conflict countries, civil society often represents or mimics the conflict itself. Let's be clear. The infighting between civil society actors, you will have often reproduced the same social exclusions that we see in the rest of society. I mean, one of the things that we see when we're working over 20 conflict zones is that everyone you talk to wants peace. Everyone says they want peace, right? Everyone does. But what they mean is their peace. And their peace generally excludes you, right?
Yeah.
And if it excludes anyone in particular, it's women. Well, we've had experiences where we've negotiated between extremely hardline groups on the Palestinian side and extremely hardline groups on the Israeli side who agree to talk to each other. But the one thing they agree on most is the role of women in society. That's what they agree on, excluding women from any possible role. So often when we're working on peace, be it from civil society or government, etc., it's a peace at what cost? And I think civil society often reflects the problems of the rest of society. If I can just rebound on something the minister said at the beginning, where he said, we have to understand why more women aren't voting to support women. My counter question would be, why aren't more men voting for women? No?
Yeah.
And how, because one of the, we're often putting too much of the burden of inclusion on women to somehow be better educated. The men in many parliaments are not educated. I'm sorry.
Correct.
Let's be honest.
I agree.
They're less educated in life or in good sense than the women in society, even if they haven't been to school. But we put the burden on inclusion on those who are excluded. We need to put the burden of inclusion on those who are excluding. Because what's at the heart of most conflicts that we're dealing with today? It's exclusion. Political, social, or economic exclusion. And the sense of injustice that creates. This is not a hairy-fairy notion of let's all kumbaya, get along, and live together in a better, more inclusive society. It's about, as the minister said, this is about peace and security. A more inclusive society will be a more peaceful society. No question. We have our director, Interpeace's director in New York, Graham Simpson, who's the lead author on the Youth Peace and Security Report that you've been hearing about. Same thing with youth. It's even somewhat more complicated on the youth question because it's a transient category. You stop being youth at some point, but you don't stop being a woman. So the challenge of women's inclusion is one that will last all their lives, whereas with youth, at some point they will graduate to becoming an adult, and they can be included more naturally. So we're faced with this type of challenge, but let's stop putting the burden on them and look at this as what is needed for societies to be more peaceful. A more inclusive society will be a more peaceful society, but inclusion at all levels. And it's not a nice thing to do, it's necessary. And we're talking about prevention. One of the best ways of analyzing prevention is to analyze who's excluded in society. Huh? Because that's going to be the germination, the germe in French, the seeds or the sprouts of resentment, injustice, etc., which will, if not dealt with and channeled, will lead to conflict and violence. So it's a matter of life and death in a sense. And the challenge of our time, I believe, I'm also part American, I can tell you it's also a challenge in the US, in Europe, I'm French. It's a huge problem in France, the issue of inclusion. This is the big challenge of our time. How do we make our societies more inclusive? And it's not just the Somalis who have this problem. The French have this problem. The Americans have this problem. Sweden has less this problem, perhaps. But it's still a challenge in Sweden. We know that from work here as well. So it's a challenge, it's a universal challenge. But this is the challenge of our generation's time. How do we create political, social, and economic systems that are more inclusive, where everyone feels they have a chance, that they can belong? And often, again, we say that it's a minority problem. In most countries that we analyze, it's actually a majority problem. It's their notion of what it means to be from their country. In Sri Lanka, what does it mean to be Sri Lankan? Or from Burma or Myanmar, what does it mean to be from Myanmar? It's that question that is actually at the heart of the exclusion question that we have to overcome, instead of putting the burden on the minority.
Good, thank you. And Minister Wallström, I'm sure you have reflections on what it's like to be a woman in government and support women. Would you like to say a few words before we open up the floor?
Yeah, thank you very much. And allow me a joke to begin with, because you know what women say, to get as far as a man, you have to be twice as good as a man. Luckily, that is not difficult. So, but not to joke, but to say, you know, we cannot wait for attitudes to change. Then it will take another 200 years or so. We need to focus on the things that we can do now. And through history, to achieve rights, the same equal rights for women has been a matter of fighting. Women struggling together to achieve reforms and take necessary steps. And this is why when we describe a feminist foreign policy, for example, I do it in very practical terms. I say that the parameters have to do with rights, and that goes now for Liberia and for every country. You check on, do women and girls enjoy the same legal and human rights as men and boys? Can they go to school? Are they allowed to go to school? Are they registered to begin with? What about their right to open a bank account or to start a business? Or are they discriminated against around the world? Still, there are 100 countries that have rules that forbid women from taking up certain jobs. Secondly, so you check on the rights. Secondly, you check on the representation. I wouldn't worry too much about quotas. I am for quotas. I think it has to begin with quotas to make sure that we get rid of the discrimination that is a de facto discrimination that exists with men choosing men as it is today. And how often do you worry about men not being qualified enough to do this or that, or maybe they take on something even though they are not fully qualified? Do you hear that we worry about that? But women do worry. They can actually say no if they feel that they are not up to it. Very often they do. So they don't even get to a job because they think I am not really up to this. I think they deserve somebody better than me. This is sometimes a problem. And thirdly, we need to make sure that resources are also used for the needs of women and girls. And that means, for example, budgeting, gender budgeting, to make sure that we have the statistics to base everything on. I don't know how far Liberia has come with this. I think already you are fairly advanced. But it starts with the very practical steps. And I think Somalia needs a woman's clan. I mean, that's for sure. You have to form a women's clan to compete with the men's clans. And I think this was actually what happened in this country when we changed the political representation. In the 70s, women in Sweden threatened to form their own political party, a party only for women. And that made all the established parties change their voting lists. So now we have what you call in Africa the zebra lists. We have every other name a woman in most political parties. So the representation immediately sort of started to change. So I think that this is definitely and for sure a peace and security issue, and it has to start by stopping violence against women. Because if there is so much violence, including sexual violence, how can you make women feel so safe and secure that they can actually run for office? When we had the big gender equality conference and forum here in Stockholm just a couple of weeks, or how long was it, two weeks ago? I arranged a lunch for 20 women representatives from countries in war and conflict to discuss what are the challenges to women representation, also in mediation and peace building and all of that. I was horrific stories, because what they told me, it was really, they said they have been attacked, harassed and bullied while running for political positions, of rumors and lies, of aggressive accusations stemming from very conservative views of sexism. And this is true for women, not only from these conflict areas, but also in other countries. And it has to start with this. And this is also a matter for men, or basically for men, to stop violence against women. And that must be a fight that we fight together, because that will forever put a mark in an individual, but it will also mark a family, a village, and in the end a whole country, if this is done to so many women around the world. So I think that these are the elements that we have to use. We have to go about it in a very practical way. Start with rights, representation, and resources, and then take it from there. But it will take a struggle, and we hope that today many men will join us. And it is not a matter of being better than men. We joke about it, but I think that it's a matter of bringing something different, a different experience, a different perspective, and that adds to it. And I think it would be good for, maybe men are afraid that they will lose love, I don't know, maybe that's a deep fear. It will give more love to the world, and it will help also the children if they see that both mothers and fathers can live together and struggle and fight together. So I think this is really where we have to turn it into something practical with reforms needed. But it will take some more struggle, and women will have to show the solidarity. I think there is so much of solidarity working together. Nothing about them without them is my motto also. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And just one reflection I've noticed in the youth peace and security dialogue, that this generation of peace builders, in a way that women didn't at the start of 1325, is demanding power and a differently shaped table. I think they're able to tell other groups how to support them, how to be allies. And it's a very different unrolling of that agenda, and one perhaps we can learn from also. So we'll have just a few minutes of questions. What I'd recommend is each of you give, just if you can, a short reflection, and then I'll ask the panelists both to wrap up their answer and their final statements in one. So do we have a microphone? Yes, ma'am, here in the front.
Do you have a mic?
It's coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for our panelists. It was really great to hear, and particularly from Minister, that the problems and the challenges that nowadays the women, and particularly women activists and women organizations are facing, that is not only in Afghanistan, I'm sure in different countries. But when we talk about women inclusions, beside that we ignoring the civil society, the role of civil society, the role of women's group, it's not possible that we have women in at the tables. I could say proudly that the achievement we have now as a deputy minister and so many other women, that was the results of lobby and advocacy of HAS during the last 15 years. But unfortunately, now we see that those organizations, those women-led organizations, that they are going to close their organization, their offices, but still we try to keep our solidarity, which is, as I believe, since my beginning of activism, I believe on solidarity, I believe on unity, and still I continue my fight, and I still continue my struggle to keep up the voice of women of Afghanistan. As now we see here, that is not something that we are facing these challenges within our own community. Unfortunately, we are also facing these challenges from the international community that they are ignoring the women's movement. The women movement, it's a woman movement, it's a global issue. It's not something that should be done by one or two.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt, not out of a lack of solidarity, but just to say, thank you. We tried to get a couple of questions out.
Okay, I will end it. But I do more emphasize on women solidarity at the national, international, and global level, because women issue is not national issue. That is a global issue. And such a forum, such a gathering, it needs more and more solidarity, that we must do more focus and strength women's movement, and particularly strengthen the civil society movement and within the country, that they could keep the voice of women alive.
Correct.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Yes, ma'am, and then sir here.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the government of Sweden and CIPRI for this opportunity. I'm from Liberia, Margot Wallström. We're very happy to see you here. But I'm from the Women's Situation Room. I want you to look at this. You are seeing the women of Africa wake up. We are waking up, and we are giants in Africa. And we're taking over our governments. And we're taking over our countries at a time of elections. It's very important. And we're doing it with the youth, the disenfranchised, disadvantaged young men and women who are targeted by politicians at the time of elections to commit electoral violence, which carry our countries into spirals of violence. And it must stop. And we, the women of Africa, are telling you it will stop through the Women's Situation Room. The Women's Situation Room, these women come together from the lowest woman up to the highest, to eminent women. And we intervene in the mechanism of electoral processes. We deal with violence before, during, and after elections. We go into the ghettos and we sit with the youth, these children who call themselves friends of the dead. We go into graveyards and we meet with them. And they're the ones that are paid $2 and $1 by the politicians to come in and destabilize our countries. And they're the ones that are forgotten and left alone. But they are able to turn the tables. They are able to carry us into violence. And the women of Africa are now engaging them. We are also engaging all the stakeholders, the politicians and everybody else. And we are changing the way things are done in Africa when it comes to our elections. And this is important. We are not playing ball in your court. We are changing the court.
Exactly.
The court, we are changing where it's being done. Exactly. And that is important for us. And we are taking charge of this and saying we, the women, will no longer go through this when you have your wars and we have to go ahead and scrounge around to normalize relations for our children and for the country and get the country back. Liberia is known for several things, one of which, of course, is our women at the peace table, definitely. Another thing is the Women's Peace Hut. I have to bring that up to you. The Women's Peace Hut in Liberia is where ordinary Liberian women in villages get around and decide outside of the norm to hold peace huts. We have what we call palaver huts in Liberia, but the women do the peace huts. They bring in people dealing with domestic violence and violence in the community. And they sit down and they judge it and they make sure it works. Another thing Liberia is known for is the Women's Situation Room. Yes, we agree with our minister. We have a problem in terms of representation in parliament. But again, we're not there to play in your court. Our court is wider than your parliament. Our court is wider than that structure you call government. Our court is the Republic of Liberia. And our court has now become the whole of Africa as we implement the Women's Situation Room in every African country under the mandate of the African Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And one final question to this gentleman.
First of all, thank you very much for a wonderful panel. Eduardo Echara Gomez, School of Government and International Relations from Externado de Colombia University. I would like to make a reflection on the Colombian case based precisely on what Deputy Minister Ras and Scott Weber just said. Regarding is not a matter just of filling quotas, and it's not a matter of how many women are sitting in the peace process, because in the Colombian case, both the Colombian delegation as the Colombian government delegation and the FARC delegation most of them were men. In the Colombian case, the exception was Colombia's Foreign Affairs Minister, Maria Ángela Holguín, as well as Maria Paulina Rivero. So I think it's a perfect reflection of what Scott Weber just said. It's not how many women, but how relevant is their participation. And also, I know that there were a lot of women behind the scenes. I can speak in terms of the Colombian government delegations. For instance, they didn't appear in the media, but they were instrumental in getting peace. For instance, Juanita Goebertus, or, for instance, Elena Ambrosi. And a specific question for Scott Weber. You mentioned the importance of including everybody as the peace process will get representative. But if we focus on the Colombian case outside of the gender perspective, but in terms of the political opposition, it seems that it's at odds with what you just said, as many Colombians believe that this peace process did not reflect their interest. Of course, many of them, there was like a there were not like a lot of quality arguments in the discussion, but still many people rejected the peace agreement and many others didn't vote. So outside of the gender perspective, what would you say about it? Because it kind of contradicts your point about inclusion, exclusion, and representation. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do now is move from Scott down the line. Your final reflections, and I'll turn the floor over to you, Minister Wallström.
Great. One thing I didn't get a chance to mention is I often get asked, why are women particularly good peace builders? And it's a kind of controversial question because you don't want to focus on gender necessarily as a factor. But, you know, in all the years I've been doing peace building, I think it's irrefutable. And there is one factor amongst others. The minister mentioned a few already, but there's one I wanted to just highlight, which is that to do peace building well, you have to be able to check your ego at the door. You have to be able to check your ego at the door and go in and be a facilitator. And particularly in macho countries, women are much better able to do that amongst actors who are going to be threatened by a male facilitator often. So there's that issue of ego that's key. But I wanted to come back to the lady from Liberia. I didn't catch your name. And you echoed what I was said, but much more eloquently, that we shouldn't just look at how do we make the current type of peace processes more inclusive, but actually change what we mean by peace processes. You said change the court. I couldn't agree more. I think part of the problem that we're facing is that we're trying to retrofit a broken system. And the peace processes, take the Colombian example from the gentleman over there, building peace in Colombia will be a 20-year project, no question. So whether or not the negotiations were inclusive enough, et cetera, that's a debate we could have until we're old. But for peace to work, it does need to be inclusive. And I'll give an example from Colombia that we've seen, as we've engaged also with FARC on the ground, is that as soon as the peace agreement was signed, the assumption was, even for women combatants on FARC, is go back and make babies now. Now that we've signed, go back and play your traditional role. When these ladies were commanders, captains, etc., in the struggle, now that when you have peace, guess what? You go back to the traditional structures of society. And this is where I mean by, even after you sign the agreement, the peace going forward still needs to be inclusive. You can't stop, and that's why changing the court is so important. If we think about it as negotiations, we're actually going to undermine the longer-term inclusivity, which we know is key to the peace sticking in a place like Colombia.
So Scott, I'm going to cut you off there. I'm very sorry, just because we're already over, but thank you for those reflections. Yes?
My final reflection, I think, would be as an Afghan woman and usually traveling around the world, and for a lot of us, one of the experiences we have is that not only in our own society, but outside of Afghanistan, we're also looked upon as victims. And I think this forum, I would like to request everyone to think about Afghan woman as a strong woman, to think about an Afghan woman as your partner, to think about an Afghan woman being a dynamic woman in the region. Those who are coming from the region and those who have met us in person, you probably will agree with that. Today in Afghanistan, we have an active civil society that had been very vibrant, and the reason we have been able to keep a check and balance system on the government, on us, is because of the civil society, because of the free media that we have, and of course because of the international community bringing and really making sure to change the rules and the regulations. But it's a different country than it was before. Even the historical perspective, we had strong women. I come from a family where my father had passed in 2001. It was my mother who raised one daughter and 3 sons, all of us being educated, a single mother. And I think that is a true example of a woman from a developing country. So it's not only that we have struggled within our own society and trying to change the course of the thoughts, it's also our struggle at the international, with our international partners as well. So anything that we would like to proceed beyond and forward, I think my humble request will be to engage Afghan women as well with you as your business partner, as your work partners, and count on us as the way you are. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before coming here, my next agenda in Somalia was to campaign to have minimum 30% quota in the constitution. That is under review. But now, after hearing the minister, I don't need to campaign for that. What we're going to do is go back, fight to become a separate clan, to be a separate clan, be united as a clan of women, and fight for our rights in that way. I want to thank the government of Sweden and the Swedish embassy in Somalia, who are currently working with us in mediation, reconciliation, and conflict prevention. With that training or capacity building, I'm sure the Somali women will unite and will become an extra clan. Will connect from the clans that we belong, and 2020 we will be the fighting for our rights based on our clan, and we are hopefully doing with the help of the Swedish government and the international community, who is also supporting Somalia in many different ways. And I want to thank you very much for that idea, really.
Yalla forward. Yalla forward.
Well, thank you. Let me just thank the Swedish government also, follow the protocol. But exclusion is exclusion. Whether you are excluding a woman that is educated or uneducated is exclusion. To address that, and Scott, you mentioned something about negotiating, the men will always shy away and say no to a woman. That is because they don't want peace. Because they know with a woman involvement, there will be peace. That's right. No question about that in my mind. I'm sure you've seen that all over the world. So to address exclusion, and you're right, Scott, why are we putting the emphasis on women, not men? To address that, we need to address it and force the issue through laws. That's the only way. Because no African man is going to sit there. A few of us might do it and accept it. But in the villages, to say that the woman is going to be the chief of the town, you're going to have a problem with that. But if the law requires that she has equal right, whether she's educated or not, that she should not be excluded if she wants to participate. And I think that's where my position is.
Good. Thank you, Minister. Please join me in thanking this amazing panel. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I see that we are all hot from also new commitments and new plans that might be dangerous, but I think also very promising. Thank you, first of all, to our panelists, of course. I think we give them another round of applause. Thank you very much for your knowledgeable leadership as our moderator. And it's a pleasure for me to be able to say thank you to all of you for coming and for contributing, for everything that you are doing every day, fighting for peace, whether you are in a civil society organization or if you are a minister, and everything in between. And you are needed more than ever, because we can see that we live in such a dangerous world, a worrisome situation for the world. But it is also up to us. The destiny of others is also our destiny today. And we need to form a good force for democracy, for human rights, for development, and for sustainable peace. And to achieve sustainable peace, you have to work with inclusion, as just was said also by our minister. It has to be an inclusive process. So with that, again, thank you very much for being here. Have a safe trip home, and yalla forward together.
Thank you.
Thank you to CIPRI, of course. I should have said that to begin with. It's a pleasure to work with CIPRI in arranging this. Welcome back another time.